Hail, hail, the Celtics are here, and we are back. We are here on the precipice of a new season under Brendan Rodgers with a Celtic team that's, I was almost about to say firing on all cylinders there, but we definitely went through a lot of motions and a lot of paces all over the world. We've been in Japan, we've been in Ireland, and finally we're back in Glasgow. And joining me for the flagship podcast, as ever, we've got Josh McCaffrey. Josh, good to see you, mate.
Good to see you back on the pod after a couple of weeks off, but I think we've got a lot to run through today and can't wait for the season to begin.
Back by popular demand as well, we've got Anthony Joseph from Sky Sports. So Anthony, good to see you, mate. Hail, hail.
Thanks very much for having me on again. It's a pleasure.
Yeah, pleasure's all ours, buddy. And I think, you know, for Celtic fans, it's always, you know, we're always looking forward and we're always trying to push in terms of like, oh, where could we be at this point next year? Where could we be at this year? And the end of pre-season coming into the beginning of the season is probably one of the peak parts of, you know, supporting Celtic, is the expectation coming into a fresh campaign, you know, having all the slates clean, so many new faces coming in, players with points to prove, and, you know, everything's to be had. Pre-season has had a lot of, let's say, dividing opinions on some performances, some individuals that have stood up or not. I guess I'll throw to yourself first, Anthony, but throughout pre-season, you know, how do you feel the team has progressed, or do you feel that we've seen enough from them over the last couple of games?
I think it's really hard to judge in pre-season, because I've seen pre-seasons where some players have looked amazing, and I'll always remember, like, for example, like Niall McGinn and Paddy McCourt in that Wembley Cup, and then the season just being awful. So I don't tend to judge too much on pre-season when I'm thinking about the football side of things. I think Celtic have done okay. I think there's been some good performances from some players. Like Maida certainly looks like he's very sharp at the moment. That first half performance against Wolves was very good from the team in general, and the second half against Bilbao to Kyogo also looks good. I thought O was putting himself about and actually pinging balls left, right and centre that second half against Bilbao as well. So there's positives there. I think if you're going to really nitpick on weaknesses, that I thought the goalkeeping situation does need to be looked at, and Celtic are looking at that. And Joe Hart, so we might touch on it a bit later, I think has served Celtic well for 2 years. He's been a good goalkeeper for Celtic. He's proven to be the right man to come in, but perhaps is losing his grip on being at the top level now with his age, and might be okay domestically, but if Celtic, I think, want to do something in Europe this season, then I think they might need to upgrade on Joe Hart, or at least provide a real challenge to him.
Yeah, I would echo your thoughts about pre-season not being very, obviously it's important, but in terms of performances and how the team's going to do and progress, I don't think you can take much of it. But it has been quite exciting, because initially about April, May time, nobody really would have expected Celtic to be in the position where we're going through pre-season with a new manager and losing one of our key players in Jota. So in that aspect, I think for the supporters and the fans, it has been a very interesting one, seeing how the team does under the new gaffer. Like you say, players like Daizen Maeda have stood out. I think Alejandro Bernabé has looked really good. He scored twice in pre-season. I think he's going to put up a fight for that left-back position with Greg Taylor in the season going forward. And on Joe Hart, like you say, he didn't play a minute against Athletic Club. It was Siegrist in the first half and Scott Bain in the second half. So I don't know I'm not sure if there was any injuries or anything going on there, but that could be telling. And yeah, I think it's been a productive pre-season for Celtic. Like you said earlier, when we've been to Japan, we've been to Ireland, we've got to see Celtic fan bases from all over the world, and that's only going to help the club in terms of marketing and global attraction. So it's been a good one, productive, and now the real stuff. We're looking forward to that.
Yeah, I feel that, like, you know, the elephant in the room with the team at the moment is we've sold somebody for 27 million, clearly the most talented player in the squad, you know, the kind of prize asset, as it were, and there's been no real replacement, you know, done yet. You know, there's been no kind of big name transfer, not even in the same position, but even just the talisman, you know, kind of replacement element of it all. And when I'm doing live streams and I hear Celtic fans kind of talking in on the content and that as well, not just on this channel but on other ones as well, the kind of main sentiment is like, we've lost a lot of goals, we've lost a lot of talent out of that front line. And the Telio, I was actually really impressed with Young Jun against Bilbao. I thought he looked really tidy, really nippy, and I could see the very loose Jota comparisons that the people in Korea that had watched him gave him. They did say he does have a bit of that, kind of twinkle toes about him, when he's on the ball, and you definitely seen a bit of that, I think. But I do feel watching through pre-season that Daizen Maeda, Abada, and I would even put Bernabe into this, they all look about a foot taller. They all look a wee bit more confident. Their chest is out an extra couple of inches, and they just feel like, So it's one of those ones sometimes, and I'm forgetting of a really good example off the top of my head, but sometimes, when teams have sold a stellar kind of guy, that's been a part of a good team, sometimes the team will still go on and actually achieve more. And then, it's a bit of a trope. I've seen it before in football, and it's like, oh, look at that idiot. He transferred to that team to win the Champions League, and then that team that he left won it. That kind of thing happened before, if you get me. So I've been really impressed with how attacking we've been. I've been really impressed with how, because I was really nervous with Rodgers taking over from Ange, like Daizen Maeda, who's his surrogate child. I would have expected him to go, Kyogo would, I think we all fancied Rodgers would make good use out of Kyogo and probably Abada. But with Abada having those statistics last season, he just seemed like huge transfer bait for a lot of these teams around Europe, But it feels like all three of them are totally bought in, totally, and I say, running around a foot taller and a little bit stronger for it. The defence and everything, the goalkeeper in particular, is one of those ones where I think we definitely see the lack of movement on there. But I do feel in the forward line, the best three forwards we've still got, I don't really think that necessarily scores less goals than the attacking situation we had last year. I do feel that the goalkeeper is a huge part that we need to be looking for. And Livakovic has been mentioned. I've been harping on about a few different wonder kids that have been on and around Europe as well. It's really interesting to hear you saying earlier, Anthony, that Celtic are definitely in the market, are certainly looking at the goalkeeper position. But the goalkeeper one is one where we do need to spend a bit of money. We do need to get a proper marquee purchase up there. And I do feel that the forward line, without there being necessarily a Jota typecast proper replacement, I'm not really sure that's as much needed as a goalkeeper or something else that firms us up in the back.
Yeah, I think you're right in terms of a goalkeeper. You probably do need to spend money because you want a ready-made goalkeeper. It's hard to find a goalkeeper that's showing potential that's going to go straight into your first team squad or is not already being tapped up by the top elite clubs, or certainly being looked at. So it's hard to find a goalkeeper. What I'm meaning is in their early 20s, who you're not going to be buying for 20 million or 30 million, which is what a lot of the elite clubs do. So Celtic need to look at maybe more of a seasoned pro, someone who has been about in similar perhaps levels to Celtic, and I guess Livakovic does fit that bill. He's been at Dynamo Zagreb for a long time. He's played in the Champions League, he's played at the World Cups, he's played for his country. That fits the bill. He's 28 as well. Obviously, Celtic have been closely monitoring his situation, and then a few days after reporting that, Fenerbahce had made a bid, and they were very close to doing that deal, but that deal hasn't been done yet, and there's been a lot of delay to that, and it could be on the brink of collapse as well, with other clubs also interested. We reported about Villarreal, Saudi Arabian clubs, and I believe another La Liga sides are in for him as well. So he's still on Celtic's radar, but Celtic don't, because he was very close to joining Fenerbahce, Celtic have moved on to other targets as well. As far as I'm aware, they're not any further on with any of these targets yet, and they're still fully sort of assessing the goalkeeping situation. And I think that's why, as Josh touched on there, we saw Siegrist and Scott Bain play the 90 minutes against Bilbao, and Joe Hart didn't play any of it. So I think he just wants to make sure he's getting it right. And Rodgers, I think he wants to make sure that, well, could Siegrist be the challenger? Could he actually step up and take the place? I don't think that's going to be there for Scott Bain, to be honest. I think Scott Bain very much knows his position. He's going to be a squad player. He's also there for the, I think he counts for the homegrown section as well for Europe as well. So, yeah, I think it's definitely in Celtic's best interest to be looking for a ready-made goalkeeper. I think it's harder to get someone who's younger in their early 20s, and they may need to look for someone who is more of a culture keeper. But they also need to get it right in terms of fitting Brendan Rodgers' mould, because when Rodgers came in last time, he had Craig Gordon, and he signed Doris de Vries to sort of be his number one goalkeeper and to be his sweeper keeper, because Craig Gordon, let's be honest, was an amazing goalkeeper for Celtic, with his like shot stopping and commanding his area, things like that. But the ball at his feet and the way Celtic were playing, it was very nervous, especially in Europe when he was passing out to Boyata and other central defenders. Celtic were immediately, like, opponents were immediately pressing Celtic because they knew that Craig Gordon was a bit nervous when he had the ball at his feet. He got Doris de Vries in, and that just didn't work. So he stuck with Craig Gordon, but I think this time he'll want someone who can actually play, who can actually be that sweeper keeper for him. And Joe Hart doesn't fit that bill, because Joe Hart's also got his weakness is the ball at his feet, while he has other attributes that are really good. So there's a lot to do there, and I think it's one of the hardest positions to find, a goalkeeper, because of the age situation. They do peak later, much later in their careers. And also just the fact that you need one to fit your system, because most teams think of their systems in an attacking way or a defensive way, but not actually thinking necessarily about the goalkeeper. You think more about your defense, but you need to have a goalkeeper that fits in with the style of play that you're gonna that you want to play. So it'll be interesting to see who the other targets that emerge and who they may actually push for, or if Rodgers does feel that no, none of the targets that we've been looking for or that are available are better than what we've got. And Joe Hart is a very good goalkeeper. He's just definitely on his last perhaps year, I would say, of being able to perform at this level.
Yeah, I think it's interesting as well that obviously he does, like you said, have a year left on his deal, and some excellent points there about, like, in terms of, like, you want a season pro and you're wanting someone who's good. And I think as well it's the time Celtic are taking, and Brendan Rodgers is good because it's given them a lot of time to consider the option and not rush into things like they potentially have done in the past, where they've got the signings wrong or whatever and stuff like that. Like, you look at Vasilis Barkas, they went out and spent £4.5 million on him. He came in and he didn't really do too well. You can talk as much about the COVID situation, how that helped that, but it wasn't really too good. So it is very good that Celtic are taking their time with this and assessing all the options, like you said. But going back to you, Quinny, on the kind of front line in terms of like a marquee signing, a Jota replacement, but you look at the players Celtic have got up front, you've got Kyogo, Marco Tilio, Yang Hyun-jun, James Forrest, Daizen Maeda, Leah Labada. There's so many players in that attacking front line who have great talent. So you're probably not looking at signing another winger unless someone is offloaded. Sead Haksabanovic as well is another one that comes to mind. So if so many players in that front line, it's good in terms of depth that if one or two gets injured. But it's going to be interesting to see, I think, how Brendan Rodgers manages giving all those players game time to keep them happy, because we have quite a few, like I've listed off there. But back to the goalkeeping situation, I think, yeah, will be interesting to see, because it is arguably one of the most important positions in the team. Everything starts from the goalkeeper. I think as well with Joe Hart, what he brought was immense leadership in the team. He was a season pro. He came in at 33, 32 years old, won Premier League with Man City, several England caps, and he was excellent when he came in from the first year and his second year. But like we say, he is prone to an error, and he is getting to that age now. Although goalkeepers do last longer, he is getting to that kind of top end of his career where he's thinking about hanging up his gloves or hanging up his boots per se. But I think I can't wait to see who Celtic actually get in, if they get one in the goalkeeping position, because I've been a big advocate of them signing someone there for the past 6 months or so.
Yeah, because like when you think about what's needed coming into this season, we're thinking about all the questions that I see Brendan answering is like, oh, can you win another treble? Because also that was the stable diet for him when he was here last time, as well as, satisfy kind of our ambitions of like go on, and his as well from what he says, push on in Europe, start to really put us back on the map in that sense. And as I'm rolling back the years in my mind as we're talking now, thinking about European campaigns, like clearly, like every good campaign, we've had a goalkeeper that or you felt at least one-on-one, he'll give you something. He might be able to keep you in a game. He might be able to keep the scoring down. I'm thinking about it. Craig Gordon for a few years was very, very good. Fraser Forster, I think, on both spells in Europe and domestically was fantastic. And we all love Boric, and there was a few guys that were kind of very okay before then. And Hart, I do feel that you get that experience with him, and I don't really feel that even in the games where we've been open defensively and we've conceded, like, let's say, soft goals in Europe, I don't feel, off the top of my head from memory, there was that many like calamitous goals. Like leaving a guy one-on-one on the counter-attack isn't ideal, but that's not like sacrilege. It's football. Guys end up one-on-one at some point. You expect people to defend and whatnot. And I think he does give you some great like high-level, cool mind, organisation, reading the game, spotting danger, and does all that kind of stuff well. And for me, it is kind of like the shot-stopping part of it that I worry about with Joe Hart. Like the goals I see going like against him, sometimes I'm just like, oh, come on, man. Could have saved one of those. I'm thinking about, I think it was against Motherwell or Aberdeen. Somebody scored like 2 or 3 against us towards the back end of the season. And you're like, mate, come on, one of them you could have saved. Come on, man. Like, because the goalkeeper has to be pulling out some saves, really, for me. And watching the Bilbao game, it was just when we mentioned like Siegrist and Bain earlier on. I thought Siegrist was quite unlucky with the goals that went against him. He made 1 or 2 okay saves, a couple of good passes. But the highlight of the game for me was Scott Bain's Cruyff turn. And as soon as I seen that, I was like, that guy must be the most confident guy in that team. He knows he's not getting sold. He knows he's not going to play. He knows it doesn't matter. He's not going to get dropped. So he's just out there dropping Cruyff turns against Munain and all these kind of guys and just loving life. And sometimes, confidence for a goalkeeper is a big part of it. And I thought Bain actually, did kind of be okay for a number 3 in the kind of setting it was. But 100%, it's got to be. It's interesting to hear, like, it's probably more of a veteran, somebody who's kind of seasoned, somebody who's dived around a bit and actually, played some matches might be the thing that we go for this time, because even in that sweeper keeper mode, like, there's not that many of them going around, but it's been on the agenda for football long enough that there's enough guys out there, really. It does really come to opportunity and price, I think, and that's the bit where Celtic fans in the club maybe aren't completely aligned, where we think there's opportunity, maybe there isn't, and kind of vice versa. But yeah, I think through pre-season, the last thing you want to come out of pre-season is talking about a goalkeeper. Pre-season, it should be more about outfield players, but I think the displays that Hearts had, as well as some of the other guys, like, I don't think any of them in any of the matches you're like, oh, he actually looks like he's on a bit of form, or he looks like he's had a good pre-season, or like I was mentioning with the forwards, like Joe Hart looks a bit taller now. He looks a wee bit more confident. Rodgers has put a wee pep in his step. It's still kind of yet to be seen. Brendan Rodgers has come out and backed him, and I think if there's anyone in terms of a manager at Celtic that could get a good season out of Joe Hart for this year, it's probably Brendan. But for where the team does stand now, I mentioned, going on domestic trebles again, perhaps, and going on and trying to push on in Europe as well. From what we've seen in pre-season, for where the squad's at, do we think those are realistic things to be talking about?
In terms of going on to win another treble?
Yeah.
I mean, you'd hope so. I mean, Celtic, you want Celtic to have the strongest squad in Scotland, which is basically, in realistic terms, is to have a stronger squad than Rangers. And you'd like to think a current treble-winning squad minus Jota and with a few more additions is still worthy, is still capable of winning the treble. I think we have to be still realistic on how hard a job it is to win a treble, because yes, being the best team over the course of a season is perhaps, I mean, if you've got the best squad, is perhaps an easier thing. I don't like to say that really either, but to win the cups and to consistently win cup games is really hard. And we have been blessed as Celtic fans to have witnessed such a crazy amount of success in the last decade or so. Just even in the last 7 years, what is it, 5 trebles? It's unprecedented. We'd only won 3 trebles before that, so it's just crazy to think that there's been 5 trebles in 7 years, and we have to temper expectations that is it's surely not going to continue all the time. So perhaps if you're talking about, you might have the squad that's capable of doing it, but to actually do it is like ridiculous. I mean, it is. A lot of people say, "Oh, Celtic have the biggest budget." But to go and win a treble is really hard to do. So yes, Celtic might have the biggest budget, might go on to win the league, but to actually go on and win both cups as well, it's an extremely tough challenge, and I would never go out and predict that Celtic will go on to win a treble, but I'd like to think this current squad can go on and win the league. I always say this especially with our new signings from untapped markets, I'd be lying if I said I knew too much about their footballing abilities. And I think unless you're actually speaking to experts in the countries that they've been playing, I think most fans, it's hard to predict how these players are going to come in and actually replace Jota, for example, if Yang and Tilio are the Jota replacements. But you'd like to see other players flourish under Brendan Rodgers, and we were talking about players like Abada. I think Abada could, if he sticks around, which is perhaps looking like he will now, that he could flourish under Brendan Rodgers. That kind of Rodgers' management style is totally different to Ange's, and there's a few players that will benefit from that. I think players like Abada. So when I was talking about management style, Rodgers likes to talk to each player almost on a daily basis, have meetings with players, actually thrash out a development plan with players, and keep in constant contact with them and see how they're getting on and give little tips of advice, that kind of thing, and speak to his wider coaching staff and to see how they're getting on in other parts of their game and their physical development as well. So that's very different to Ange, who almost basically didn't speak to the players apart from in the dressing room or at certain training sessions when they were doing tactical analysis and ahead of big games. So that's a huge change, and I think certain players like Abada might really flourish under that. Matt O'Reilly, I think, will work really well with Rodgers. I think Rodgers likes very intelligent people and very intelligent players, and Matt O'Reilly is a very intelligent person, almost in the same kind of mould as Stuart Armstrong, who Rodgers loved and got on well and managed to really kick on his career as well at Celtic. And also, another player we're talking about, Bernabei, but more just because of the style of play. Bernabei is definitely that sort of kind of traditional left back who likes to bomb up and down the wing and overlap. And I think Rodgers' style of football allows that more than what Ange's style of football, which was very much a left back almost when in possession, being almost a central midfield sort of role with the inverted fullback. So I think there's positives. There's real positives within the squad that they've already got that we could see more of. And certain players, Rodgers loves working closely with players and developing them. And the likes of Bernabei, Abada, O'Reilly, and Hatate, I think, are really the four to really watch and see their progress over the course of the season. And that's sort of, I think, going to be the exciting part of how this season could go, because I do think Celtic still have the strongest squad. I know Rangers are doing a bit of a rebuild, quite a big rebuild actually. They have brought in some players. Danilo looks to be the biggest signing for them, and that was quite a coup for them. So it'll be interesting to see how their squad develops and gels. But Celtic need to lay down a marker from the offset that they are the treble-winning champions, and they're not going to stop. They're not going to give up their title without a real challenge, and that's got to be the way. And the cups, I feel, are the bonus. If they can win the cups, that is a bonus. I don't think you can expect Celtic to just win a treble like that. As long as they win the league, that is the main the main thing.
Yeah, I think, like you've said, Anthony, a treble is such a hard thing to do. You look around the world in leagues like Spain, France, England, and Man City have just done it, but you think of the amount of teams that have actually went out and won trebles in the past decade or so. It's like very few numbers you're looking at, and obviously we've won 5 in the past 7 years, absolutely unprecedented levels of success, and we forget how hard it is to do a treble, particularly in the cup. You've got to be on it every single game. You've got about 5 or 6, 7, 8 games in a cup competition to go through unscathed. You've got to go to grounds like Pittodrie, got to go to grounds like Easter Road, Tynecastle, potentially even Ibrox, and derbies and semi-finals and finals. You've got to win every single game. You cannot have an off day. You cannot slip up. So Celtic have had brilliant success in the past few years. Obviously, we are the treble winning champions, so the expectation from the fans, I think, will be another treble, and I think the target within the club, like Sir Brendan Rodgers, he will be wanting another treble to lay down a marker for his new tenure in charge of the club, but it will be very tough to do. I believe we have the strongest squad in Scotland. Maybe that's a bit of personal bias, but I certainly do believe that. But it's just about, can we be consistent throughout the campaign again? We've been consistent for the past decade. We've had some brilliant success. We've been an absolutely brilliant team. Changes of players, changes of managers. In spite of that, we've continued to do very well. So Brendan Rodgers can come back in and get the squad playing the way he likes. I think we've seen in his first season in charge and his initial spell at the club how successful we were. We were unbeaten the whole campaign, won an invincible treble. He will look to replicate even some of that success this season, and if he can get the team playing, I think that's very much possible. But at the same time, it will be very tough to do. The league is the main priority. I think you want to secure Champions League football for next season, especially with the competition expanding. I think that should be the key priority. And like you said, the cups are just a bonus, but they are important in their own right, because a treble would be a 9th treble would be absolutely insane for the club to win. I mean, I don't even imagine the celebrations that would happen if that could happen, but it's a long way in the distance. We need to take each game as it happens. That's starting with Ross County at the weekend, and I think as long as you don't look too far into the future, there's still so many stages of the season. Celtic are going to be on great form for some parts of this season. We're going to go through ruts at some part of this season. I'm very much sure of that. But it's about getting through each week as it comes and making sure the squad is utilised to the best it can be, because we do have some terrific talent in the team. You've got the likes of Rio Hatate, Kyogo, Dyson Maid, are all absolutely top-class players. They need to be managed very well. And there are, like we say, some players to watch out for this season. I think it could be a season for Alessandro Bernabé to take that left-back spot off Greg Taylor. I said it sometimes when he played this last season that in a couple of years' time he will be Celtic's starting fullback. And I think he could kick on this season and show why he could become that type of player. I think another player to look out for is Odin Thiago Holm. He looked very good against Athletic Club on Tuesday night. And I think as well, if you get nominated for the European Golden Boy Award, you're not going to be a bad player. You're going to have something about you, and he does have that. We've seen that in his first few games. He's played in the deepest role of the midfield, which I think he's done very well in, spraying passes about quite nicely. So it'll be interesting to see how he gets on in the forthcoming campaign. But we do have a lot of young talent in the squad as well. Like, that is Celtic's transfer model after all. We're looking to bring young players in for small fees and then sell them on for major profit, and that's what they have been doing recently, and that's what they're going to continue to do. And these young players are not brought in as just who are going to sit in the B team, who are going to look to play, get minutes here and there. These are players who are going to come in and look to contribute. Like Rio Hatate done it, Jota done it. He was a great success. He came in when he was 21, 22 years old, and he's left as the club as a talisman. So I think we do have great talent in the squad. It is a squad that's capable of doing the treble, but I think it will be very tough.
Yeah. I think that's the kind of key denominator with like the treble aspect, isn't it? Like the league is bread and butter. The league is what we show up for every season, and it's like got to get done. And the cups are the kind of the guilt-free fun part of it. Like when you get to cup semi-finals and finals, it's 3 hits. It's not 3 points on the line or title slip-ups potentially and that kind of thing. And we've definitely grew accustomed to having all the finer trimmings around all the silverware for the last couple of seasons. But that common denominator is like that kind of air of invincibility to go home and away, across the country throughout these different competitions, win the one-off games and get there. And, you know, the blue team across the city, I think they've had a stellar transfer window so far. I think like the actual caliber of people that they're signing is pretty good. But you know, they were so far behind. I'm more nervous on the treble front this year than maybe I would have been last year, the year before, for the fact that like in a one-off setting, like I do think we've still got the best squad. I do think we've probably, I'd say certainly still got the best starting 11 of the two teams. But I believe Cifuentes is close to actually signing. The Danilo move is a huge one. I think, you know, think how good Giakoumakis was. This Danilo guy's played for Ajax and Feyenoord, won the league there, scored buckets of goals there. Brazilian striker, so he's definitely not anything to be sniffed at. And there's a few other guys that are pretty decent as well. But point being, Rangers will be a totally different test this season to last. And I love Rio, I love O'Reilly, Kyogo, and everything else, right? But the only one in the team that will really know what a strong Rangers feels like, really, in terms of what we're probably going to get out of them as an opponent this year versus maybe last season, is McGregor. You know, so I do feel that as much as like getting Odin Holmes and Kyang Juns and all these, the ones that fit the model are very exciting and very promising. But when you see them over the pond, their models, like they're looking 2 or 3 years older, they're spending an extra couple of quid to make sure they're first team ready because they are playing catch up, you know. But, you know, that catch up, eventually you have to confront that at some point for us. I mean, you need to put them back down again and go, boom, beat them. And if we are constantly recruiting a lot of these young players, again, maybe throws back to what we were talking about earlier in terms of that talisman. Like if we brought another, maybe we are missing a wee bit more top-end talent just to keep us that distance away, if that makes sense, you know, to really just keep them at arm's length almost. But the ceiling and the guys like O'Reilly and Rio, I think under Rodgers, I think and Abada and Bernabei, all the guys we've mentioned, I think under Rodgers they could have amazing seasons. Like I just remember James Forrest, like the uptick in form he had when Rodgers came in last time, and I don't think there's anything stopping any of these guys following suit in that respect. That then kind of draws our attention, I suppose, to the European aspect of it. We're straight into the groups. I think we're still very draw sensitive, if you get me. Like if we get a draw of death, then I don't think we could spend 50 million on the team. We probably won't do very well, you know, such as life. But let's say we get a mediocre, kind of strong pot one team, a formidable pot two, and then we have somebody in the bottom pot that we should be putting away. What would we expect from this kind of team that we've got at the moment? I would hope we could start to get, I don't know, maybe 1 or 2 wins, positive results at home, and maybe get into the territory of looking at an away game or two and thinking we could get something on the road. I think Rodgers will probably bring that level of expectation to the squad, but the question becomes is, you know, do we have it in us? Will we do it? I suppose.
I think the target this season should be Europe after Christmas, whether that be in the form of Europa League or finishing second in the group, even at a stretch, and getting to the Champions League last 16. But even once we get there, I think we should be, particularly if we're in the Europa League, to be targeting at least 1-1 tie. In my lifetime, I'm 18 years old. Celtic have not won a knockout tie in Europe, so I'm desperate to see it happen. But at the same time, it will be interesting to see how we do. Obviously, there's a lot of the European draw, the Champions League draw. Fans get very excited about it because you are going to see, no matter what happens, you're going to see a top team at Celtic Park play your heroes and see what happens. So I think it's an exciting time. Europe is one of the most exciting aspects of the season for me. I think that's the case with most Celtic fans, is particularly in the first half of the season, because you've not really got much to look forward to. Obviously, the trophies come at the end of the season. So Europe, the majority of Celtic's European campaigns take place in the first half of the campaign, whether we like it or not. So I think getting there after Christmas would be ideal. We have the players who they've played in Europe twice now for Celtic, players like Cameron Carter-Vickers, players like Kyogo. They've had experience of playing in Europe for us 2 years in a row now, both in the Europa League and the Champions League. So I think now could be the time for them to step up and look to see how we can do in the Champions League. But it is all about the draw, like you say, Quinn. If we get a group of death, a Bayern, PSG, Barcelona group, teams like that, I think you're looking at finishing bottom, but it's the luck of the draw. Last season I think we did get quite a good draw. We were very fortunate. We could have done much better in Europe last season, but it is what it is. That's in the past now. That was under Andrew. We're looking to a new era under Brendan Rodgers, and I don't think Rodgers did do too bad, as much as we've said Celtic have been poor in Europe. gave Bayern Munich a game at Celtic Park. I think we could have got a much better result that night. You look at games like Anderlecht away, we won 3-0. That was absolutely amazing. So he has a decent track record in Europe. He got Leicester to the semi-finals, I believe it was, and he got them a couple of runs in Europe there, in the Europa League and Europa Conference League. So he does have the calibre to do that, and I think he potentially could do that. But I think the target is just get to Europe after Christmas and potentially win a tie if we're in the Europa League. That should be the target. And I think the experience as well and the allure of having the Champions League automatic has been brilliant for the club. It's allowed us to have the pre-season we have done. Going to Japan, if we had qualifiers, I don't know if that would have been possible. And it's definitely attracted certain players, the likes of Odin Thiago Holm, who's came from Norway. The fact Celtic are already in the Champions League has definitely enticed him as well. Alessandro Bernabei, coming from South America, probably wouldn't have known a lot about Celtic, but because we are in the Champions League automatically, you're able to tell him that. He's like, okay, that's the club for me. So it definitely is a big thing for Celtic. And as well, that's why we should be aiming to, the league should be the priority this year so that we can get that again and have that we're able to tell potential incomings that we're automatically in the Champions League. We don't have to worry about qualifiers. It's such a big thing. But as much as it's good, you want to compete when you get there. You don't want to be just in it to take part, to make up the numbers. You want to actually do well in Europe, in the Europa League, Champions League, whatever it is, and you want to announce and show the world and show Europe that Celtic are still a big force in Europe and we can still compete and are not just going to lie down. I think the away form is not always been the greatest in Europe, particularly in the past couple of years, but at Celtic Park we know what we are capable of there. Big results against Lazio, particularly in recent times, so we want to make that a fortress again. It's not been as much of that as well in recent years. We've been beaten there 4-0 off Bayer Leverkusen. Teams have came there, took 5 off us like PSG, albeit that's a star-studded team, but you want to make Celtic Park a venue that teams are definitely scared to come to. Obviously, like Bodo Glimt coming here a couple of years ago and beating us by 3-1 is not the greatest thing to have in your track record. But hopefully, under Brendan, we can get back to becoming a staple in Europe and a tough team to beat. I think he can certainly make us that, and hopefully, we can get there after Christmas and win a tie, maybe.
I think you touched on a good few points there, Josh. There's a few things I want to add on to all of those, actually. It's in terms of Rodgers' record in Europe, at Celtic especially, I think it can be spun both ways. And I think a lot of people, the majority of fans, certainly that I speak to, and certainly my mates, would spin it in a more negative way, that he didn't do well in Europe with Celtic, or that was his one negative during his spell. But I think if I was doing Brendan Rodgers' PR, I'd be saying, his first season, he had to negotiate 4 qualifiers from the first qualifying round of the Champions League, so 8 games, and his remit was to just qualify for the Champions League because Celtic hadn't been in the Champions League for 3 years, and he did it. So that's target achieved. He got to the Champions League in his first season. Second season was to get European football after Christmas, get into the Champions League, and then get European football after Christmas. He again negotiated 8 games, 4 qualifiers, got Celtic into the Champions League, and had them finishing 3rd. I know it was only winning that 1 game, but they finished 3rd and they got into the Europa League. It was the 3rd season that perhaps you could class as a failure. Actually, you definitely could class as a failure. They didn't make it into the Champions League. They lost to AEK Athens. And then the group stages of the Europa League weren't, yes, they got 9 points. 6 of those were against Rosenborg. But they got through almost in a way when, what was it, Rosenborg beat Leipzig, was it?
They got a draw. Leipzig, yeah.
And Salzburg were beating Celtic at home.
Yep.
And somehow Celtic sneaked through. But you could say sneak through, they got 9 points. They managed to get through their group stage of the Europa League on 9 points. It's getting past that next stage. And like Josh has just said, I can't believe it. He's never seen Celtic win a knockout game in Europe. So that's, I think, is the next stage, I guess, for a club like Celtic to go on and do that. Under Rodgers this time, and then since he's been away, like you say, Rodgers has taken Leicester to a European semi-final. So now he's back at Celtic, and there's a big reason he is back at Celtic. And certainly from what we were being told when he was in negotiations with Celtic, was that the Celtic and Brendan Rodgers now see eye to eye on their ambition of where Celtic can be in Europe. And a big part of that is because of the new format of the Champions League that's coming in next season. So for expectations this season, Rodgers has already laid it out. He said his target is to be in Europe after Christmas. So that means finishing third or second, in the third or above in the Champions League group stages. So that's what we should be judging him by, because he said that's his target. I completely take your point that if Celtic get Bayern, PSG, and Barcelona, for example, then it almost becomes impossible. But you have a go, you have a good go. And Rodgers must believe in this squad and believe in the ambition and the transfer budget he's been given to perhaps build a team to do that. And I think he's probably going to be more judged in the next couple of years in Europe, because I think that's where Celtic really see where they have growth and huge potential to grow as a footballing side in Europe. That's due to, if you win the league this season, you're straight into the new format of the Champions League. And I'm sure many people have read about it. And like that's £60 million guaranteed. It's 8 Champions League games guaranteed. And the top 8, it's home and away, 4 home games, 4 away games, one-off matches. So you could play Paris Saint-Germain at home, you could play Dynamo Zagreb away, that kind of thing. And then you will, if you finish between first and 8th, you're straight into the last 16 of the Champions League. But let's perhaps keep that for the more elite and established Champions League clubs and say that Celtic should be aiming to be finishing between 9th and 24th, because that's perhaps more realistic. Out after 8 games in the Champions League, that would put them into a playoff stage for the last 16 of the Champions League, and that's an extra 2 games. So there's a good possibility that Celtic could have 10 games in the Champions League next season if they win the league this year. And if you're selling that to players, and you're talking about recruitment there, Josh, about players who want to come to play for Celtic because they're in the Champions League, imagine telling them that a fifth of your season is going to be in the Champions League, and also having £60 million to spend on perhaps a higher caliber of player, or to be able to spend a bit more on wages, because you've got 8 games guaranteed and you're aiming for 2 more, 10 games in the Champions League at least. That's a real selling point. And I think Celtic and Rodgers see this as a game changer for the seasons ahead. If you can get £60 million every season, if you keep winning the league, you're almost at the level of, so say that, I hate to always compare it to the English Premier League, but the bottom teams of the English Premier League get at least £100 million. Yet you could argue that Celtic can still attract some players that are perhaps better than the bottom end of the English Premier League. Celtic are getting, and that's with Celtic getting 30 to 40 million currently when they win the league. That if they can get double that, I mean, surely it's becoming more of a leveler to that kind of sort of buying power and pulling power, and Celtic will just be able to have that little bit more pulling power towards the club to attract better players. And I think the club is starting to realise that ambition, and it is due to changes with UEFA and the structure. But remember, who's one of the top people at the ECA is Peter Lawwell, who's been very much part of these reconstruction talks of the Champions League. It's a game changer for a club like Celtic, but it's a game changer for Rangers as well, because they have ambitions to go and win the league. So this is why Rodgers really sees there's growth potential at Celtic, and I think this is one of the main reasons why he's back at the club, because he feels he can fulfill his potential and his ambition of where he wants Celtic to be as a footballing side within Europe. And I think certainly when it was being talked to me by contacts and people who were close to the deal with Rodgers coming back to Celtic. It really, as a Celtic fan, that was very exciting to hear that is being looked at. That is really being seen as a focus. Europe is finally being seen as a focus rather than just a bonus. And I think, I mean, I don't know what you guys think, but that's what really excites me. Perhaps not this season in the Champions League, but win the league this year, and then let's see where Celtic are and what they can do with the extra cash, the extra pulling power, and to grow as a club for the next, not just the next couple of seasons, but for the next decade beyond Rodgers at Celtic. They'll have pulling power to bring in better managers. They'll have pulling power to bring in better players. That's the potential. It might not work like that. You might not win the league. You might end up missing out on that cash. Rangers might end up getting that money and catching up to where Celtic are financially. But in general, this whole European model throughout Scottish football, if you've almost half the teams in Scotland in the Scottish Premiership are playing in Europe. And if that money can now filter down, because there's going to be more money in the Europa League, there's going to be more money in the Conference League due to this trickle-down effect and change of structure, it's surely going to be a positive thing for Scottish football. And I think you can see the growth potential. I know it might not happen like that, but there is the chance now for Scottish football and certainly Scottish clubs and the likes of Celtic and Rangers to catch up. Not catch up with the elite, but to maybe be more competitive with the elite.
Yeah, I think that the format of the Champions League going forward, Celtic are probably one of the few clubs, and Scottish fans are probably one of the few fan bases that aren't as up in arms about it. You know, everyone at that kind of elite end is crying out because it's more games and the players and all that kind of stuff. But I just hear 5 home games in the Champions League. Basically, sign me up. So I do feel that a lot of the forward planning has been with that kind of reconstruction in mind, and I think, I don't know, I really do want I think this season, actual success, getting into Christmas like we're talking about, is definitely something that we should be looking at to really kind of like close this period of the Champions League in our history, because this is going to be like a whole new kind of segment again, isn't it? And, I feel so bad for you, Josh, when you were saying that there, because I remember being like, growing up as a Celtic fan, and the main thing I had that was like that was never seeing Celtic in a knockout like European Cup game. If you're not a champion, Champions League as we call it now, kind of thing. And I can remember being in the stadium the night we qualified for the first time for the knockout round against ended up being AC Milan, and it was better than any final I'd been to, it was better than any derby I'd been to or anything like that. So those are the moments I think is like a Celtic fan base. It's definitely a lot of people missing that, haven't had it, or I say it's been long overdue. And I feel Rodgers, that's probably part of that alignment with the board. He feels that, he knows that that's part of that Celtic DNA, that's what makes this club what it is, and that's what allows you to attract those players. It's what allows you to keep a Henrik Larsson for 7 years, because you can go to a UEFA Cup final, you can go into group stages every season, and it doesn't matter who the draw's against, we're getting 9 points at home. That was the kind of the way we walked and the way we talked back then. So, bring it on is how I'm feeling. In terms of the new signings and this kind of guys as well, we've touched on one or two of them. I actually hadn't paid Odenholm actually too much mind over the Atletico game, because Kwon, it just took so much of my attention. He just looked like a guy that was given a go, like kind of thing. Didn't look too great at all. But of all the new signings, I think the one in his appearance against Bilbao that most fans was like, okay, we could see this guy probably becoming maybe in the best 11 in the next 2 months or so, is Mike Nawrocki, the big Polish centre-half that we've just signed in from Legia Warsaw. So just wanted to get your thoughts on big Nawrocki, and do we think he could push Starfelt out of the team? Could he be the partner-elect to Carter Vickers that we thought Kobayashi could be, and that maybe some fans think Liam Scales could be?
I think it would be tough for Nawrocki to do that, because you look at Starfelt and Carter Vickers, the partnership they have is utterly solid. They've not lost a league match when they've started together, so it certainly will be tough for the young boy to come in and put a Swedish international out of the team who's just won a treble with Celtic. So I think it could be a while before we see him become a regular week in, week out starter. But I've said it before in the podcast that I think a club like Celtic, and every club, needs 3 centre-backs who are able to start and I think Celtic now have that in Carter Vickers, Starfelt, and Mike Nawrocki's been the player who's come in. We've needed a centre-half and we got him. Polish international, he still has room for growth. I think he does have lots of potential and bags of potential to go on and be a top-class centre-half, but right now he's still only, I think he's 22 years of age, 23 years of age, something like that, so he's still very young, playing next to guys like Carter Vickers and Starfelt who have more experience coming into their prime years, or that's only going to help him and benefit him as a player going forward. I think on the ball, he looked quite good against the Athletic Club, pinging some nice passes about. I could see that what people were saying about his two-footedness can play with his right and his left, which is only beneficial as well. And I think he is versatile. I think he can even fill in at right back. I've seen a couple of people from Poland say that, so maybe that could be something that's been in mind as well when signing, because we know when Celtic have signed players in recent times, they've looked for that versatility, so maybe he could go and fill in there. But I think, like you said, Quinny mentioned Liam Scales there. He has looked all right in pre-season, but I don't know if he'll be someone who has a long-term future at the club. But I think we should be keeping another centre-back around as well, like one of Stephen Welsh or Scales to stay, because you can't just rely on three. If one or two gets injured, then you're kind of stuffed. So I think Nawrocki's a very good sign. I think he's arguably the best signing of the summer so far. We've literally only seen him for a good 3-4 weeks, but I think he's the one who could come in and contribute the most early on in the season, and it'll be interesting to see if he gets the nod again on Saturday.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. Nawrocki is definitely the player who is ready-made, I think. Well, you'd like to, on paper, certainly is. Out of all the signings that Celtic have brought in, he's ready-made to come in and replace Starfelt or Carter Vickers if they are injured, and push both of them for a starting place in the side. In terms of Scales and Welsh, I think Scales has definitely been around longer because of the injury situation with the centre-backs, with Carter Vickers' recovery and Starfelt taking a knock as well. Aberdeen really want them back, and Celtic have just been delaying that because of the situation. It would not surprise me if he ended up back at Aberdeen, but perhaps later in the window. More so because I think Rodgers actually thinks he's all right. And I think a lot of Celtic fans have been like, hey, he can put in a shift if required. And I mean, he's an Ireland international. He's played Europa League games with Shamrock Rovers as well, and played European games with Aberdeen. So, I mean, he's an okay player to have in your squad, but long term, and if he wants to really kick on in his career, I guess a move away would probably be best. And the same situation again has happened with Stephen Welsh. There's a lot of clubs interested in him. There's a couple in Germany, a couple in Serie A as well, looking at him. But there's just been a delay on making a decision on Welsh. And he also fits into the homegrown mould as well. It fits into the homegrown category. So that could go either way, I think. I don't think it's a certainty. I think maybe a month ago, before pre-season had started and everything, I think it was almost a certainty that Welsh would be one of those that would moved on so he could kick on his career. But I think with the injury situation and also with the homegrown situation for the Champions League, I think that's almost 50-50 at the moment. And I think it's also a credit to both of them that they have impressed in pre-season as well. And Rodgers is perhaps not wanting to just let them go easily, wants more time to assess. He's got time in proper competitive games now to assess them and see where they both fit in compared to the first team regulars. And yeah, there's a good chance both could still leave by the end of the window, but I think it'll be later in the window if they do, and perhaps more so Scales than Welsh.
If it's okay to ask, do you know if Aberdeen are going to try and sign him or loan him?
They want to sign him permanently. I don't think they want another loan. Whether Celtic say you can have him on loan again, they would. I'd imagine they'd take that, but they definitely want him on a permanent deal.
Interesting. Because yeah, he's definitely kind of stood out in that. And I think Big Nawrocki, when I watched him against Bilbao, he gave me kind of Sven Botman vibes. I don't know if any of you have watched Newcastle or Lille, certainly over the last couple of years, but big, tall guy on the left-hand side of defence, and there was one pass early on in the game where it was a wee bit, just kind of get your feet set, and between him and Taylor, I think it went out for a throw-in or something. But yeah, the big man looked good, and I think between Starfelt and Vickers, we did expect maybe Kobayashi was maybe going to come in and push these guys. We've even seen Iwata kind of fill in at centre-back, previous manager and also the current manager's played him centre-back and right-back. So it does feel that there's definitely a lot of bodies around the centre-back position, but with that whole Welsh and Scales element of it as well, half in, half out, I think if you let both of them go, you would maybe think the depth is, maybe a bit weak. You're talking about Carter Vickers, Starfelt, Davroche and UK. If that was going to be the only four. So again, if one or two of them go down, I don't think Yuki's impressed as much. And so it's one of those ones. It'll be very interesting to see how it does pan out. I think the homegrown one is definitely a dynamic that is maybe going to come back against Scales, not Scales, Welsh, I beg your pardon, perhaps on this one, because it's like the players, they all want to get minutes, they all want to get reps. But thinking about it as time goes on, like if we are going to be continuously pushing on three fronts domestically and have, let's say, 8 to 10 Champions League games, then we are becoming, we're slipping into that slipstream almost that most of the top end Premier League, Bundesliga, Serie A clubs are in, where it is a 65, 70 game calendar, give or take, because of the amount of games you have, European and domestic, which then pushes the need for the squads to be deeper. So maybe a wee bit easier to maybe appease them with that kind of stuff on the horizon. I think coming into the weekend, like we've seen Carter Vickers play the first half, we've seen Starfelt play the second half, and a lot of people were asking me saying, "Oh, do you think that means it's going to be Carter Vickers and Davroche start, or do you think that means that it's going to be Carter Vickers and Starfelt? They both get 45, neither of them was overworked, So I think when it comes to starting 11 for the weekend, the defence really is the question marks. The front six, if you like, I think picks itself easy enough. But coming into the game for the weekend, which is going to kick off our season, what would you expect, let's just say, the defence to be for the weekend? Do you think Davroche's done enough, or do you think we'll keep with Starfelt?
I think it'll be, I think between the sticks, probably Joe Hart, I would say. I don't know if he'll go with Siegrist again, but I think the defence is definitely one of the toughest parts of the team to pick now, because of the amount of options we have as well as injuries. At the same time, I think at left back, I would personally prefer Alessandro Bernabé to get the nod ahead of Taylor, but I think Brendan's going to go with Greg Taylor at left back. And I think at right back, Anthony Ralston, if he is fully fit, he played the second half, I think he'll start at right back as well. Obviously, you'd rather him starting there than probably Iwata, who's not a natural right back, as decent as he's done there so far in pre-season. I think at centre half, Brendan refused to rule out the fact that Carter Vickers might not even start at the weekend after the game against Athletic Club, so you could indeed see Starfelt and Nawrocki. That could be the partnership. If Vickers is not fit, I think it will be Starfelt and Nawrocki. If Vickers is fit, I would back Starfelt and Carter Vickers to get the starts together at the back.
Yeah, I'd agree with that as well. I think it'll be Joe Hart in goals. I think the Bilbao game, Rodgers was just looking at just to have a look in a game what Bain and Siegrist could bring. But Joe Hart is the number one at Celtic at the moment. Left back, I think he will go with Taylor, but I think eventually, perhaps under the Rodgers style and system, we're going to see more of Bernabei. And there's no reason why both can't almost have a rotation in a way. But it'll be interesting to see who would get the nod in Europe. And Celtic have had players like that all the time throughout recent history. Players like Samaras, for example, wouldn't always start in league games. Quite often it was Stokes. And then for Europe or the big games, Samaras would start. Celtic have had players even going to Mark Rosas would play a lot of home games, but not many away games, that kind of thing. So
the one that jumps to my mind is Lustig and Adam Matthews.
Yeah, another couple. So I mean that can work. And Taylor is really. So when I thought when Bernabei was signed last summer, I thought that's Ange saying that he wants a new left back. Taylor probably isn't going to fit into the way he plays, or isn't maybe that level above what is a top Scottish Premiership player. And then Taylor just worked his socks off pre-season, and then I remember that debut against Aberdeen. He was playing like a man he's playing like someone you want to see, who a club's just signed a player in your position and you're stepping up. That's what you want to see from players. And he did it for the whole season. He was brilliant last season. And so it would be harsh to not give him the starting slot, I think, at left back. But I think Bernabeu is going to get more of a chance this season as well. Central defence, it all depends on how Carter Vickers and Starfelt's injuries are going to go, and then Nawrocki will play in place of either one or not play at all. And then I would prefer Ralston at the moment to Iwata at right back. So I think I think the two major decisions are going to be depending on how Carter Vickers and Starfelt have trained today, really, ahead of the weekend's game.
Fair enough. I think, it's funny how I think all the way through pre-season, Welsh and Scales have featured clearly the most, obviously down to injuries and stuff, but none of them are in the frame for the weekend, which is a wee bit bittersweet, I suppose, for those guys putting in some good performances. But for the defence, I wouldn't be surprised if it was the defence that started the Bilbao game, that he sticks with Iwata in the right back for the first half, and just maybe massages the game from there. But equally, as I'm thinking about it, I would not be one bit surprised if they played Scales and Carter Vickers. Really wouldn't surprise me, especially if he did play Bernabeu from the start as well, because the games in Japan, certainly, you've seen a good bit of Scales kind of moving into, almost the inverted fullback spot from not being a fullback, just the way possession kind of went a few times. And I think he might have a Iwata doing something like that on the right, but I think the defence is going to be the one where I don't think it'll be Starfelt and Vickers. I can't bring myself to say that, and I can't work out what I think it will be either. But I think it's could even be. I wouldn't even at this point rule out it being Starfelt and Nawrocki the second time. A wee bit because Starfelt's played a bit more pre-season. Carter Vickers hasn't played as much. So it's definitely a tricky combo. Joe Hart, in goals for sure, and I think right back's much more of a coin toss for sure. So it's a difficult one. But I think I'd probably stick with the first half of Bilbao is what I'd go with to start.
And you don't want to rush Carter Vickers back. Yes, he started the Bilbao game, but if he's not ready to feature in a competitive game, just ease him back in August and have him ready for Europe in September, because that, I guess, is where you need your best players, especially. And then September is also the first derby game as well. So I think as long as Carter Vickers, it'd be great to have him back mid-August, but as long as he's ready for the start of September, I think it's okay to ease him back in. And if they feel Nawrocki can fill that void, then should definitely play him.
And I guess we'll end the show, guys. We've got some beginning of season predictions, okay? So we've got 3 here that have been prepared for us today. The first one we've kind of spoke about without really nailing it down, I suppose. But what trophies will Celtic win? I guess I'll kick us off and pass it around. I'll go with a treble. I think we'll get over the line. I think Rodgers, one of the statements he made when he first unveiled the Celtic manager was, "I've been in this position before of having a treble winning team to having to get them to go and do a treble again." So I back the big man to do it, and I think we'll go and scoop it.
I'm going to go with you, Connor. I'm going to say another treble. And in Europe, I think we'll get after Christmas and potentially win a tie. But definitely a treble. I'll go with that.
I hope it's a treble. I think they'll definitely win. I'm not going to say definitely. I think they'll win the league. I think they'll probably win the League Cup, which is earlier. I don't want to say treble. Yeah, I want to say treble, but I don't also want to go and jinx it. But because it's very hard to win a treble. But I think 2 trophies, the league and a trophy, will be won this season.
Yeah, we need somebody to keep a dose of realism in the room. So cheers for that. The next one, and who will be the standout player? So you can think about this in however way you want. It could be Kyogo scoring 100 goals. It could be, Greg Taylor playing attacking mid or something like that again this year. For me, I think the standout player, the one that probably just write the most headlines, I'll just go with, I'm going to go with McGregor. I think McGregor's probably been in much, throughout pre-season, we've seen him in a bit more of an advanced position, like we've seen with him and Rodgers before. And I think with him having the captain's armband, if he can get like 7 or 8 goals and like 7 or 8 assists this season, it'd be on top of what he does for the team already. I think he'll be the one that will be the standout of any success we have.
I think I'm going to go for Liel Abada. I think having him down at the club sorted for another year, I think is great for Celtic. His numbers last season, despite limited minutes, were amazing. We've seen what he'd done. He scored several goals, come on off the bench, contributed. I think as well, he could be looking for an even bigger uptake in those minutes this season and thus numbers in terms of goals and assists. We've seen he's looked sharp in pre-season so far, and I think especially under Brendan Rodgers, he could get the most out of Abada. I think Jota is a player whose contributions need replaced, and I think Abada could be the man who steps up. He is getting to 22, 23 years of age now. He's no longer a teenager. He's no longer a young boy. He could certainly come on this season, I think, and become a big, big player for Celtic.
You took the words out of my mouth, Josh. I was going to say Abada as well. I think he's going to flourish under Rodgers. I think he's exactly the type of winger that Rodgers likes. And he's a numbers man. He gets assists. He scores goals. And Kyogo's going to score goals. He will obviously be a standout player. But other than that, in terms of assists and goals, I think Abada is going to be so crucial.
Love it. And then what player could be the surprise package? And I think to keep it very much in the surprise category, since I picked the captain for standout, I'll go with Hyung Jun, just because I think the first glimpses of him, if somebody was to be a surprise, I think a guy like him, if he could get into the realms of getting 5 to 7 goals and something similar in terms of assists across all competitions, I think that would be a real surprise probably for, you know, the transfer fee and the lack of fanfare around his signing. So I would probably go with Hyung Jun.
Yep, I would go with, I've got 2 players in mind. One of them is Bernabe. We've spoke already about how he could do under Rodgers and do really well at that left back overlapping full back position. As well as Bernabe, I'll mention Odin Thiago Holm as well. I think he could come into the midfield, and I don't think he'll start many games unless we have like a really, really packed schedule. I can't see him becoming a first team player, but I think he could be one of those players who comes in and does well, and people are calling for him to start every week. But I would go with Bernabe and Odin Thiago Holm. Yeah,
I'm going to go with Bernabe as well. Like we've been discussing throughout this podcast, I just think he's going to get more game time. He suits Rodgers' style. He's that kind of attacking left back who loves to overlap, and we've already seen him score a couple of goals and involved in a great piece of play for his goal against Bilbao. I think he could. I mean, it's not necessarily going to be surprising for Celtic fans, because I think we're seeing this and we sort of understand Rodgers' type of football and how it could suit. But I think for the rest of the wider footballing world and Scottish football, I think he will surprise many people.
Yeah, solid shouts. Love it. Well, guys, I hope you enjoy the weekend. I hope it's a great flag day for everyone that's listening to this and you have a great time. It's a great result for the Hoops, and we get the league campaign off to an absolute flyer. Josh, hail, hail, mate. It's been an absolute pleasure having you on.
Thank you very much. Been great to be on again. Hail, hail. And
Anthony, pleasure as always, mate. Thanks for coming back. Great seeing you again.
Thanks for having me on again. It's been a great chat.
Hail, hail, and see you soon.